blood dripped onto Khloe's favorite flower-dusted apron. "Hide me!" the stranger choked out, collapsing against the bakery counter. She thought she was saving a random mugging victim. She had no idea she had just locked the doors with Chicago's most ruthless mafia boss and made herself a target. Rain lashed against the frosted glass of Sugarsmith Pastries on North Darman Avenue. Khloe Davies hummed along to a muffled Fleetwood Mac track, playing from her cracked iPhone. She was 26, comfortably fat and fiercely unapologetic about it. After years of battling toxic diet culture and the unsolicited opinions of her mother, Khloe had claimed her space in the world. Her thick thighs, soft belly and wide hips were a part of her, and in the quiet sanctuary of the bakery's night shift, she felt entirely at peace. Her hands slick with butter, and dusted-in flour expertly kneaded a massive mound of brioche dough. The scent of yeast vanilla and melting brown sugar usually kept the harsh realities of Chicago at bay. But tonight the city was about to bleed onto her floor. A deafening crash shattered the rhythmic hum of the industrial mixers. The heavy steel door at the back alley, the one secured with a deadbolt, rattled violently before bursting open with a sickening crunch of splintering wood. Khloe gasped, dropping her dough scraper. A man stumbled over the threshold. He didn't look like the usual junkies or drunks that wandered through Wicker Park at 3 a.m. Even through the dim fluorescent lighting, Khloe could tell the soaked, ruined suit he wore was bespoke. A torn Brioni jacket clung to his broad shoulders, and a crimson stain rapidly expanded across his crisp white shirt. He slammed the broken door shut behind him, leaning his full heavy weight against it. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his sharp, angular face was deathly pale. When his piercing amber eyes locked onto hers, Khloe felt the breath knock out of her lungs. "Hide me!" He rasped his voice, a low, gravelly command rather than a plea. Khloe's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I need to call an ambulance. You're bleeding." "No cops, no hospitals," he interrupted, coughing violently. He clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers to drip onto the pristine, black and white, checkered linoleum. "They're coming. If they find me, they kill us both. Hide me. Now." Heavy footsteps splashed in the alleyway outside, accompanied by muffled, aggressive shouting. Someone slammed a fist against the metal door right beside the stranger's ear. Panic, sharp and cold, spiked in Khloe's veins. She didn't have time to overthink. Instinct took over. "Come on," she whispered fiercely. She grabbed his uninjured arm, hauling him away from the door. He was massive, built like a tank, and his weight was staggering. Khloe's own strength, built from hauling 50-pound bags of flour daily, was the only thing keeping him upright. She half-dragged, half-carried him into the cramped, windowless, dry storage room at the back of the kitchen, shoving him behind a towering rack of commercial sugar bins. "Stay quiet," she breathed, grabbing a damp towel to hastily wipe the trail of blood he'd left on the floor. Just as she tossed the bloody rag into a bin and kicked a crate of potatoes over the spot, the front bell chimed violently. The glass door had been forced open. 3 men stepped into the bakery. They wore heavy leather jackets, their faces twisted into ugly sneers. The lead man, a brute with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, kept his hand suspiciously tucked inside his jacket. A gun. Khloe knew a concealed weapon when she saw one. "We're closed," Khloe said, forcing her voice to stay steady. She crossed her arms over her chest, hoping her flour-covered apron made her look like nothing more than an irritated baker. "Looking for a guy." The scarred man grunted his eyes, darting around the stainless steel prep tables and commercial ovens. Tall dark hair, bleeding like a stuck pig. "He came this way." "Nobody came in here," Khloe lied smoothly. "The front door was locked until you just broke the latch, and the alley door is dead-bolted. If someone was bleeding out, I'd have noticed." The man stepped closer, invading her personal space. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her full figure with a mixture of dismissal and crude disgust. "You sure about that, sweetheart? You wouldn't be hiding a stray dog in here, would you?" Khloe stood her ground, drawing herself up to her full height. She was a big girl, and she knew how to take up space when she needed to. "I'm sure. And if you don't leave my kitchen in the next 5 seconds, I'm hitting the panic button under this counter that connects directly to the 14th District Police Precinct." The men exchanged a tense look. A siren wailed faintly in the distance, echoing off the wet pavement of North Avenue. "Let's go," one of the thugs muttered. "If Bianke made it to the street, his crew is probably already circling." The scarred man glared at Khloe one last time before turning on his heel. "Keep the doors locked, bakery girl." When the door clicked shut and their van tore away from the curb, Khloe let out a shuddering breath. Her legs felt like jelly. She rushed back to the storage room. The stranger Bianke they had called him was slumped against a 50-pound bag of Domino sugar. He was barely conscious. "They're gone," Khloe whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. She pulled the ripped fabric of his shirt aside, gasping at the sight. A bullet had torn through his left side, grazing his ribs. "You need a doctor. Real medical attention. You'll do." He breathed, his heavy eyelids fluttering. "First aid kit. Need to stop the bleeding." Khloe rushed to the employee bathroom, returning with a heavily stocked industrial first aid kit, a bottle of rubbing alcohol and clean towels. She knelt beside him, her soft, thick thighs pressed against the cold floor. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "I've had worse," he grunted. As she poured the alcohol over the wound, his entire body went rigid, a low, guttural groan escaping his lips. But he didn't pull away. Khloe worked quickly, her hands surprisingly steady, as she packed the wound with gauze and wrapped medical tape tightly around his torso. The cramped space forced an intense intimacy between them. As she leaned over him to secure the bandage, her chest brushed against his uninjured shoulder. She pulled back instinctively, her cheeks burning, suddenly hyper-aware of her own size and the undeniable proximity to this dangerously attractive man. But when she looked at his face, he wasn't looking at her with the derision she was used to from conventionally handsome men. His amber eyes were dark, tracking her every movement. He looked at her soft curves, the flush in her cheeks, and the fierce determination in her eyes, with a raw, primal intensity that made her breath hitch. "You're brave," he murmured, his voice a dark velvet rumble. He lifted a blood-stained hand, his knuckles brushing lightly against the curve of her waist. "And you're soft, in all the right places." Khloe's heart did a violent flip. "I'm just a baker." She deflected, batting his hand away with feigned annoyance, though her skin tingled where he had touched her. "And you're a mess. Don't think about flirting with me while you're bleeding out in my sugar supply." A faint, dangerous smirk played on his lips before his eyes finally rolled back, and he passed out cold against her. Morning broke over Chicago in a wash of dreary grey. When Khloe returned from the front of the shop after unlocking the doors for the morning crew, the storage room was empty. The stranger was gone. The only evidence that he had ever been there was a faint smear of rust-colored blood on the linoleum, a discarded bloody shirt, and a stack of crisp $100 bills sitting on the flour bin. Beneath the cash was a heavy, solid gold Zippo lighter, engraved with a stylized roaring lion. No note, no thank you. Khloe stared at the money, her stomach twisting into a tight knot. She shoved the cash and the lighter into her apron pocket, scrubbed the floor with bleach, and threw the bloody shirt into the incinerator out back. She spent the next week looking over her shoulder, jumping at the sound of the shop bell, and triple-checking the deadbolts on her tiny apartment in Logan Square. She tried to convince herself it was a bizarre, isolated incident. just a crazy Chicago night, but deep down, the weight of the gold lighter in her purse felt like an anchor tying her to an unseen, dangerous world. 7 days later, reality violently caught up with her. It was 11:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. Khloe had just locked up the bakery and was walking toward the Western Avenue Blue Line station. The streets were quiet, the damp air biting at her cheeks. She pulled her thick wool coat tighter around her body, her headphones playing a true crime podcast. Suddenly, a black Lincoln Navigator screeched to a halt at the curb, cutting off her path on the sidewalk. Before Khloe could react, the back doors flew open. 2 men jumped out. Panic seized her throat as she recognized the scarred eyebrow of the man from the bakery. Well, if it isn't the lying baker, the scarred man sneered, pulling a suppressed pistol from his jacket. We found out Bianke survived, which means you hid him, you fat bitch. Arthur Gallagher wants to have a word with you. Khloe didn't scream. With a surge of adrenaline, she swung her heavy canvas tote bag packed with leftover artisan loaves and a heavy metal thermos directly into the scarred man's face. He cursed, staggering backward. She bolted her thick thighs, pumping hard as she sprinted down the alleyway, but she wasn't fast enough. The second thug tackled her from behind. Khloe hit the wet pavement hard, the breath exploding from her lungs. She fought back like a cornered animal, kicking, scratching, and using her heavy frame to try and pin the man beneath her. But a sharp blow to the side of her head sent stars exploding across her vision. "Grab her legs, throw her in the trunk," one of them yelled. Suddenly the roar of a high-powered engine shattered the night. A sleek, bulletproof Mercedes G-Wagon tore into the alley, blinding them with high beams. The men froze. The doors of the G-Wagon flew open, and 4 men in tailored suits stepped out, raising automatic weapons. "Step away from the girl," a cold, heavily accented voice commanded. The thugs didn't hesitate. They scrambled into their Lincoln and tore off down the street, leaving Khloe gasping on the wet asphalt. A tall man with a broken nose. Matteo, she would later learn, stepped forward and offered her a hand. "Miss Davies, my boss would like to see you." Khloe, dizzy and bleeding from a scrape on her forehead, had no choice but to get into the plush leather interior of the SUV. She was driven through the glowing grid of the city, bypassing the usual neighborhoods, until they pulled into the subterranean private garage of the St. Regis Chicago. She was escorted up a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling 2-story penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of Lake Michigan and the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. The opulence was suffocating marble floors, modern art, and the scent of expensive cedar and cigar smoke. Standing by the window, pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass, was the stranger. He was fully heeled, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit his massive frame perfectly. Without the blood and the pallor of near death, he was devastatingly handsome. He exuded an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. This wasn't just a criminal. This was a king, Lorenzo Bianke. Khloe whispered the name, finally clicking into place from local news headlines she had actively ignored. The head of the Bianke syndicate, the deadliest man in the Midwest. Lorenzo turned his amber eyes, locking onto hers. The coldness in his expression vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine anger as he took in the dirt on her coat and the fresh, bleeding scrape on her temple. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping inches from her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. Carefully, almost reverently, he lifted a hand and traced his thumb near the cut on her head. "Gallagher's men," he stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble. "They will be dead by morning for touching you." Khloe swatted his hand away, her fear morphing into defensive fury. "Don't touch me. Do you have any idea what you've done? You brought your mob war into my kitchen, and now I'm being hunted in the streets." "I am aware," Lorenzo said calmly, though a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Which is why you are here. From this moment on, you are under my protection." "I don't want your protection," Khloe fired back, crossing her arms over her chest. She refused to cower, looking up at him with blazing eyes. "I want to go back to my apartment, bake my bread, and forget you ever bled on my floor. I didn't ask to be part of an episode of The Sopranos." Lorenzo let out a low, rough chuckle. It was a sound that didn't match the deadly reputation attached to his name. "You are incredibly stubborn, mia dolcezza, my sweetness. And I'm also leaving," Khloe said, turning toward the elevator. Lorenzo's hand shot out, wrapping around her wrist. Not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. He pulled her gently, but inexorably backward, until her soft back was pressed against his solid, muscular chest. "You aren't going anywhere, Khloe," he murmured into her ear, his breath sending a shiver down her spine. "Arthur Gallagher is a rabid dog. He knows you saved my life. He knows I owe you a debt. He will use you to get to me." Khloe tried to pull away, feeling entirely out of her depth. "Then pay your debt by letting me go and keeping his goons away from my neighborhood." Lorenzo turned her around, his hands resting on her wide hips. He didn't shy away from her size. His large hands gripped her curves with a possessive, grounding firmness. "I run this city through control, Khloe. I don't leave loose ends. And I certainly do not leave the woman who saved my life out in the cold to be slaughtered." He stepped closer, backing her up, until her thighs hit the edge of a heavy mahogany desk. "You saved a monster, Khloe, and unfortunately for you, this monster is very territorial. You're staying here, with me." Khloe stared up at him, her chest heaving, realizing with terrifying clarity that the real danger wasn't just the men outside trying to kill her. It was the man standing right in front of her, and the way her heart betrayed her by racing at his touch. Morning light filtered through the bulletproof glass of the St. Regis penthouse, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported Italian marble. Khloe Davies sat at the massive kitchen island, staring into a cup of black coffee she hadn't touched. 3 weeks. It had been exactly 21 days since Lorenzo Bianke had declared her his unwilling houseguest. In that time, she had learned that the head of the Chicago syndicate didn't operate like the gangsters in the movies. There was no chaotic shouting, no wild parties. Lorenzo ran his empire like a Fortune 500 CEO, conducting business in hushed, lethal tones over encrypted phones and encrypted ledgers. And yet his most terrifying trait wasn't his power, it was his utter, suffocating obsession with her. Every meal was prepared by a private chef, though Khloe often bullied the man out of the kitchen so she could bake. It was her only anchor to sanity. Flour, butter, and sugar made sense. The way Lorenzo watched her when she baked did not. He would sit at the edge of the room, a glass of scotch in hand. His amber eyes tracking the sway of her heavy hips and the flush on her skin as she worked the dough. He looked at her, not with the polite tolerance she was used to from men, but with a predatory hunger that made her pulse hammer wildly against her throat. "You are staring again," Khloe muttered one evening, vigorously kneading a batch of focaccia dough. She wore one of his oversized dress shirts, the hem barely skimming her thick thighs. "I am admiring," Lorenzo corrected his voice, a low, dark rumble, as he stepped into the kitchen. He moved silently for a man of his size. Coming up behind her, he didn't hesitate to wrap his heavy arms around her waist, pulling her soft, plush back against his rock-solid chest. "There is a difference. Mia dolcezza." Khloe's breath hitched her flour-covered hands, stalling on the stainless steel counter. "Lorenzo, stop. I am trying to work. And I am trying to remind you that you belong here," he whispered, pressing a hot, open-mouthed kiss to the sensitive skin just below her ear. His large hands spread wide over her stomach, entirely unbothered by its softness. In fact, he seemed to worship it. Gallagher's men hit one of our shipping warehouses on the south side last night. They are getting desperate. He knows you are here. Khloe stiffened, the reality of her gilded cage crashing back down on her. How does he know exactly where I am? You said this building was a fortress. Lorenzo turned her around to face him. His expression darkened, the Mafia boss replacing the attentive lover in a fraction of a second. He shouldn't know. Matteo believes we have a leak. Someone inside my inner circle is feeding Gallagher information. Until I find out who it is, you do not leave this floor. Not for anything. Khloe looked into his amber eyes, seeing the genuine fear masked beneath his ruthless exterior. He wasn't just protecting an asset. He was terrified of losing her. She reached up her thumb, brushing against the rough stubble on his jaw. It was a dangerous game she was playing, falling for a man whose hands were stained with blood. But her heart had long since stopped listening to reason. The turning point came 2 days later. Lorenzo had left the penthouse for a supposedly secure meeting with the remaining heads of the Midwest families. Khloe was left under the protection of his top lieutenant, a wiry, sharp-eyed man named Dominic. Bored and restless, Khloe decided to make a batch of croissants, a tedious process that required absolute focus. She needed to retrieve more European butter from the secondary walk-in fridge near the service elevator. As she approached the heavy steel door, she heard hushed, urgent whispering. "The boss is at the warehouse," on Halstead Dominic's voice, echoed from the service corridor, low and frantic. "Yes, Gallagher, I'm sure. His security detail is light. He left Matteo here with the girl, but I've already disabled the penthouse cameras and the biometric locks on the private elevator. Send your men up now. I'll handle the baker." Khloe's blood ran ice cold. Dominic was the rat. Panic threatened to paralyze her, but survival instinct, the same instinct that had saved Lorenzo weeks ago, kicked into overdrive. She didn't run back to the main living area where Matteo was stationed. It was too far, and Dominic was already stepping out of the stairwell, a suppressed pistol gleaming in his hand. He spotted her immediately. A cruel, twisted smile stretched across his face. "Well, if it isn't the boss's fat little pet. You really thought you could play in the big leagues, Baker." Khloe didn't waste time screaming. She lunged backward into the kitchen, her mind racing. She was cornered unarmed and facing a trained killer, but she knew this kitchen better than anyone. As Dominic stepped through the doorway, raising his weapon, Khloe grabbed the nearest heavy object, a massive solid cast-iron Dutch oven resting on the stove. With a raw, guttural yell, she swung it with all the formidable strength in her thick arms, hurling the heavy pot directly at his head. The cast-iron pot struck Dominic's shoulder with a sickening crunch, sending his first shot wildly into the ceiling, showering them in plaster dust. He stumbled backward, cursing violently. Khloe didn't hesitate. She grabbed a handful of fine pastry flour from the prep station and threw it directly into his face, blinding him instantly. Dominic roared in pain and frustration, clawing at his eyes with his free hand, while blindly firing the gun with his other. Bullets shattered the custom glass cabinets, sending shards raining down like deadly hail. Khloe dove behind the massive marble island, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She was a baker, not a soldier, but she refused to die on this pristine, expensive floor. Crawling quickly toward the industrial stove, her eyes locked on a heavy canister of butane used for the chef's culinary torches. It was a massive commercial-grade cylinder, an insane, desperate plan formulated in her mind. "You're dead, you fat bitch!" Dominic screamed violently, wiping his eyes and stumbling toward the island. "Gallagher is going to skin Lorenzo alive, and I'm going to put a bullet right between your—" Khloe stood up abruptly from behind the counter. She had the heavy gold Zippo lighter Lorenzo had left her that first night in one hand, and the commercial butane canister in the other. She flicked the lighter open, the flame sparking instantly. "I'm a Baker, Dominic," Khloe said, her voice shaking, but her grip resolute. "I know exactly how things burn." She depressed the nozzle of the butane canister, sending a thick, highly pressurized stream of gas directly over the open flame of the Zippo. A massive, roaring fireball erupted across the kitchen. Dominic didn't even have time to scream as the makeshift flamethrower engulfed his upper body. He dropped his weapon, thrashing backward in sheer agony, colliding heavily with the glass dining table before collapsing onto the floor, desperately trying to smother the flames on his burning jacket. Suddenly, the private elevator doors burst open. Matteo sprinted into the room. His assault rifle raised his face, pale with panic. He took one look at the burning traitor on the floor, and the baker standing behind the counter with a butane torch, and his jaw dropped. Before Matteo could even process the scene, Lorenzo's encrypted satellite phone, which Dominic had dropped, buzzed violently on the floor. Khloe rushed forward, kicking Dominic's gun out of reach just to be safe, and snatched the phone. She answered it, her breath coming in heavy, ragged gasps. "Dominic!" Lorenzo's voice barked over the line, laced with a terrifying primal fury. "If she is harmed, I will personally carve your heart out." "Lorenzo." Khloe choked out, her adrenaline finally crashing, leaving her knees weak. "It's me." Dead silence on the other end. Then a sharp exhale. "Khloe, where is Dominic?" "He's currently on the floor. I set him on fire," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly, as Matteo quickly extinguished the traitor and zip-tied his hands behind his back. "He was working for Gallagher. He disabled the security. Gallagher's men are coming up the service elevator right now." "Matteo is with you," Lorenzo demanded, his voice suddenly shifting from panic to absolute lethal calm. "Yes, he's securing Dominic." "Give the phone to Matteo. Get into the panic room behind my office. Do not come out until I open that door myself, Khloe. Do you understand me? I am 3 minutes away." Khloe thrust the phone at Matteo and sprinted toward the back hallway. She slammed the heavy steel door of the panic room shut, just as the faint sound of gunfire erupted from the main living area. Inside the dark, heavily fortified room, time lost all meaning. Khloe sat on the floor, pulling her thick knees to her chest, trembling uncontrollably. She could hear the muffled thuds of heavy combat, the terrifying staccato of automatic weapons, and the agonizing shouts of dying men echoing through the expensive drywall. This was Lorenzo's world, a world of blood, betrayal, and violence. A world she had been violently dragged into simply because she couldn't turn away a bleeding stranger. It felt like hours, though. It was likely only minutes before the gunfire finally ceased. A suffocating silence fell over the penthouse. Then heavy footsteps approached the panic room. A familiar rhythmic knock echoed against the steel. "Khloe, it's me." She punched the code into the keypad, and the heavy door hissed open. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. His bespoke suit was ruined, splattered with blood that wasn't his own. His knuckles were raw and split, and a fresh cut bled down his cheek. He looked like the devil himself, freshly returned from a slaughter. But when his amber eyes found her, the lethal coldness vanished. He dropped his weapon to the floor, crossing the small space in a single stride, and pulled her into his massive arms. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of vanilla and fear, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely, his large hands tracing the soft, wide curves of her back, assuring himself she was whole. "I've got you. It's over." Khloe buried her face in his chest, her tears finally falling. "Gallagher?" she asked shakily. "Dead." Lorenzo answered his voice, devoid of emotion. His men in the building have been eliminated. The rest of his organization will fall in line by morning, or they will share his fate. No one will ever threaten you again. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his large, blood-stained hands. His thumbs wiped away her tears with surprising gentleness. He looked at her wide hips, her thick thighs, her soft belly, and the fierce, incredible bravery in her eyes, with absolute worship. "You took down my top lieutenant with baking flour and a lighter," Lorenzo said, a breathless, dark chuckle escaping his chest. "You are terrifying, mia dolcezza. I told you." Khloe sniffled a tiny, defiant smile, breaking through her tears. "I'm not a damsel in distress, and I don't need your protection. No." Lorenzo agreed, his amber eyes burning with intense, unyielding devotion. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "You don't need my protection, Khloe, but I need you. I need your fire. I need your softness. I need everything that you are." He captured her lips in a bruising, desperate kiss, sealing a dangerous pact between the baker and the boss. The city of Chicago belonged to Lorenzo Bianke, but as his hands gripped her thick waist, holding her as if she were his entire world, they both knew the truth. The deadliest man in the Midwest had finally been conquered completely and utterly by the woman who saved his life. From that night on, Sugarsmith Pastries never saw another broken door. But the locals quickly learned never to disrespect the beautiful thick baker behind the counter, because while her pastries were incredibly sweet, the shadows standing behind her were deadlier than the devil himself. Thank you so much for watching this intense Mafia romance drama. If you loved the thrilling twists, the high-stakes action, and Khloe's fierce bravery as she faced down the city's most dangerous men, make sure to hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a gripping, action-packed love story, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life tales. Drop a comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.